Welcome to the OMS podcast, your ultimate source of information and insights on the medical field. My name is Ronil.
And my name is Victoria, and we are excited to be your co-hosts today.
This podcast is designed for students who want to stay up to date on navigating opportunities in STEM and healthcare, with real advice from post-secondary students and professionals in the field.
Today, we'll be talking about finding resources for research and how to analyze sources. Joining us again today are our guests, Vitoria, Sarah, and Megan.
So tune in, join the conversation, and elevate your knowledge with the OMS podcast. So last week we were speaking to Sarah, Victoria, and Megan, and this week we'll do a continuation on the episode. This time we're going to be looking at how we can find resources for research and how to analyze different sources. Starting off, firstly, as we all know, AI has been a massive new technology that's been immersing in our field today, especially with ChatGPT, which is a new and upcoming piece of technology that has taken the world by surprise. So the first question today is going to be focused on ChatGPT and looking at what's your opinion of it in terms of research, and how do you think AI will be able to change research we know forever? So I'll start this one off with Megan.
Yeah, for sure. So already in the field of neuroscience, there's a subsection that's really focused on neurotechnology. So seeing how coding and data analysis can be used to map things like brain waves. So I think that's something that's really cool with that, and I hope to explore in the future as well. But already, AI can be used for things such as like data processing and just cleaning it up. And I think that makes things so much easier for researchers, since they can focus that time on the actual experiments themselves instead of just processing the data. So yeah, I'm really excited to see where artificial intelligence takes us.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to find out where AI goes within the future and what the possibilities are with that. Victoria, what do you think about this?
So I want to touch on the ChatGPT element. So some of my friends and I from my lab were chatting about this, and ChatGPT actually isn't excellent at doing research for now. So when you ask it to make up references or to write a scientific sounding article, it is able to do so, but a lot of the times it has incorrect facts or it cites papers that don't exist. And they even create fake citations for papers that never existed, which is really funny. But definitely this is kind of an intermediary step. Like in the future, ChatGPT will definitely be really good at doing this kind of thing. It just has to be tuned. And I think that's what the company is doing right now, having all this user data and then fine tuning it for the future. But definitely the field of AI is extremely exciting. I think it's going to completely revolutionize science as a whole. I especially see AI being useful when there's a lot of repetitive or pattern seeking, like menial tasks that AI can like replace. So for example, what Megan was saying, looking at like T scans and that kind of thing, that's where like the AI is really good at spotting differences and predicting changes in the brain, changes in tumors, that kind of thing. In my field, the food allergy field, we haven't really used that much AI so far. I just think the field still requires a little bit more development before we start applying it to other fields that are less kind of like obvious, like neuroscience.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I feel like with a bit more refinement that we can see things like ChatGPT being used a lot more, and with AI in general, looking at how it's going to be used in a specific field for those repetitive tasks is definitely going to be very cool. And Sarah, do you have anything else to add on this?
Yeah, I don't have much to say on the topic, just because I haven't tried ChatGPT out yet for the research world. But I imagine, given that the sources that they provide are right, it could definitely help speed up our tasks when you're trying to look for evidence for something, when you're trying to look at papers on a specific topic. If it's able to provide a list of, papers to read or authors to look at, that can really narrow down the entire Google search. I think that's one area where I would think it's going to be useful, as well as maybe summarizing a paper that's crazy long. And if you just want to get the gist of it, see if the gist is going to even match with what you're looking for, that could be useful. But personally, I haven't used it yet, so I can't really say too much to it. But I do feel like as it gets better in the coming years, it's definitely going to be used a lot more by labs and people trying to just do quick fact checks or whatever for their papers. So I think it's definitely something that's really new, so it's really exciting. But also, I think we need to wait a bit for it to become stable enough as to be a good source, I guess.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I guess waiting a bit more time to see its validity, but overall, it's very exciting to see what we can do and how it can really speed up our small tasks. I'll like to pass the next question off to Victoria.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. So we're often told by teachers to not use websites like Wikipedia for research. I think we've all been told that since, I guess, elementary school. However, are there any free and reliable websites written by scholars that are useful in writing research papers that you guys could recommend? So for this, let's start off with Megan.
Yeah, so I guess I don't know if this is like a website written by scholars, but when I'm looking at possible papers for citations and things like that, I really like using PubMed. So it's like this huge database full of these published articles. I imagine almost all of them are peer reviewed. And so that's how you know that a paper can be reliable. And when we're trying to do our own literature review for new papers, citing these peer-reviewed papers do show that legitimacy and credibility to your work as well.
Yeah, thank you. So PubMed is definitely a great research resource. Let's move on to Victoria.
Yeah, I definitely second PubMed. That's what I use primarily when I'm looking at articles. But I will say, like, I want to highlight the university databases. So if you're in university or even in high school, you might be access to like databases or like libraries, like even virtual libraries where you can access these papers, because a lot of them are like you have to pay to open the article. So looking through your university or your public library or even your high school might be a good way to start to obtain access to these articles. And the staff, like librarians, can always help you navigate these databases or these websites. So I definitely think that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a great idea to reach out to professionals or even just librarians for useful resources when doing research. Now, finally, Sarah.
Yeah, so I agree with what everyone said before. Like those are like the main ones I use. PubMed is a really good place to get stuff from, and same with the university resources. I feel like that's always where I get my papers from. Hypothetically, if there was something you did find on Wikipedia, though, usually using Wikipedia sources is a good way to, I guess, find something that you might be looking for, just because they do use real sources. It's just the way I think they put it together is not what people like. But if you go down and scroll down on that page of Wikipedia you're looking at, there are scientific papers there usually, if what they're saying is true. So I'd say that's a good way to maybe find something that you're not being able to find anywhere else, as long as the paper that is linked is like a real paper that's actually just something that was maybe harder to find. But apart from that, usually the research I find is through something like PubMed, where it just has all the papers on that one topic you're looking for, or just Google searches and a lot of reading one paper and then taking the source from that paper and the source from that paper and going down like an entire rabbit hole of papers is usually how I start my research. And then it just kind of gives me an idea of what people have done right now and what they're looking to do in the future and what they already did. So it gives a good sort of overlook at all the research on a certain topic when I do that sort of using the references within papers trick. And that's sort of what got me through the summer last year. And I've been using it even for like lab projects and stuff like that. It's always sort of worked for me.
Yeah, thank you so much for that great advice. So all these different sources, whether they're, I guess, deemed more trustworthy or not, they can be a great gateway to other better or other sources in the field. So having said that, let's pass it back to Ronald.
Yeah, for sure. And my next question comes with looking at social media and the increased use of social media and how that actually impacts the information, where there's a lot more spread of false information. So when it comes to research papers, what are your biggest tips when it comes to ensuring that the information is reliable? And are there any special checks that can be done before using any piece of information just to make sure that it's actually verified? First, I'd like to hand this off to Sarah.
Yeah, it's definitely a big issue to sort of like deem what's like true or what's false in the research world. And there's a lot of time that things come out and they're not really stuff that you should be using in your paper. So I think the main thing that I make sure is just that something that I'm using has been said by more than one paper, or at least has been referenced in another paper. Just because if those facts or those ideas are repeating, or if this one paper's idea is being cited in many other places, that means that it's something that's true or something that's maybe repeatable. I did usually find some stuff last summer that was in support of what I wanted, but I only saw it in one place, and it was so hard to find anyone else who was saying the same thing. So I usually would tend to keep those sources away, maybe to still have them, but I didn't feel safe really trusting them just because it's not enough to base an entire question or project off of if there's not multiple people who are sort of finding the same things. So definitely seeing multiple sources that are saying that thing or that are at least citing each other. And also usually I feel like when you're looking at a certain topic, there's a lot of authors that repeat and there's a lot of like labs and places that repeat a lot when they're just doing the same research again and again. So I feel like sometimes I got very familiar with the names that were on there and then I noticed them as, like being listed as a citation on one of those papers or being affiliated with this. And that sort of made me feel like, okay, this seems to be fine because I know that this is the same area of research that I've been looking at and that name is familiar and they've been doing a lot of research in glioblastoma for the past like 20 years. So this seems like it should be okay. So just a lot of that cross-checking and I do still keep some of those papers that might not be as reliable aside just because it is still out there, it still got published, so there's no reason to believe it's not true. But like when I'm actually going to be presenting something to other people, I do make sure that it has enough backup from many sources just so that it's something that's like reliable.
Yeah, I think backing it up from many sources and cross-checking are very good ideas. Victoria, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think Sarah covered pretty much everything I wanted to say, but I think being aware of the wording that news articles are using is really important because everything they say is very selected. So if anything is really sensationalized or there are words used to exaggerate what is being said, that's something you should definitely be aware of because if something sounds really amazing or too impressive, it usually means that there's like someone has something to gain from you believing that information. So I would definitely say like fact checking, like going online and finding their source article or whoever is making the statement, making sure they have the necessary credentials and that they don't have any conflicting interests with that information. Definitely important.
Yeah, totally agree. Those credentials can be very, very crucial. Megan, do you have anything to add on to this?
Yeah, I'll just touch on a little bit since Sarah and Victoria, they basically covered like everything. But I think in general, you should never really ever be using social media as a source, especially in academic research papers. A lot of the infographics that you see online, they're just not verified or they cherry pick data so that, they can exhibit a certain bias that they want readers to believe in. When it comes to actual papers, I think most of the time you definitely need to be citing peer-reviewed papers. But as Sarah said about cross-checking, I think that's really important as well because you can have peer-reviewed papers even in like very prestigious scientific journals. But if there's only one lab that is able to produce this sort of data and other labs can use their protocols and aren't able to do so, then you might be wondering that there is probably something wrong in the methodology there. And that's also something that you have to be aware of as well. So usually peer review, but you have to dive deeper beyond that as well.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I'd like to hand it off to Victoria for the next question.
Yeah, thank you. So for this next question, I'm sure anyone who has done in-depth research before can relate to. So usually when we're starting or we're actually doing our research, it's not uncommon to be completely taken aback by the huge amount of information often presented in research papers that are like sometimes dozens of pages long. Is there an effective technique you like to use that allows you to distill the main ideas and information without reading every single word on these, I guess, research papers? So let's start off with Sarah.
Yeah, so for me personally, my strategy is that I sort of glaze over the abstract first, and then if that seems sort of related to what I'm looking for, I go straight to the discussion at the very bottom and just read the discussion proper because that's usually summarized. It covers everything in the paper and is the most important findings from that study. And once I've read the discussion, if it seems like, okay, this is stuff that's related to what I'm looking for, it's like my topic or something that's important to me, that's when I sort of go back and slowly start reading it from the beginning. Or hypothetically, if I'm just looking for a specific thing, I'll, use Control F and just search for that one word or that one method that they used and read into that. But for me, definitely the thing that's always worked is just going straight to the discussion, looking at that first before dedicating too much time to it. Because if I'm reading it straight on from the beginning to the end, it's sort of hard to know what conclusion they're going to reach or where the paper is going. And sometimes it's not even something that you need to be reading because it's not related to your topic or stuff that they're doing is just, it's not relevant at all. So discussion reading for me is like my favorite technique. I love to read that first. And then if it's worth it, I'll read the rest of it.
Yeah, definitely. So the abstract or reading the abstract be a great way to sift through the many different articles that are sort of presented to you. And of course, using keywords to find relevant information within each paper. So next, let's move on to Victoria. What would you like to add?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the abstract is really important, and I definitely use Control F a lot. I think another thing that I'd like to add is I often find that a lot of important information is in the introduction and in the conclusion slash discussion of the paper. So if I'm trying to find if authors found a specific finding, I usually look at their discuss, and so I look at the abstract first, and then I look at their discussion slash conclusion. And then I go back into the introduction and make sure that I understand everything that is happening on a theoretical level. And usually that gives me enough information that I don't have to actually read the body or like the results or methods of the paper. But if I do find something that I find is interesting, I go back and look into like the figures and results. And I also want to add that there's a interesting AI tool that has been starting to be developed where you paste a link or you copy and paste the article and you put it into the AI tool and it creates a summarized version of it. It's not great for scientific articles yet, but I think with time it's going to become better at picking up like important key facts of papers. Yeah, but that's still in development, I would say.
Yeah, thank you so much. So thank you so much for giving like such a in-depth, I guess, example of how we could sift through the different ways of like finding important information within so much information. And I really hope that this AI tool one day holds a lot of potential. Finally, let's move on to Megan.
Yeah, so I think Sarah and Victoria, once again, they really covered all the bases. So there really isn't anything new that I'm, need to add, but definitely read like the abstract of the paper because that's sort of like your first impression of it. And it should be, and because it's up at the beginning, it should contain all of the necessary information that the authors want the reader to, understand from their research. So definitely that. And then once again, Control F is my favorite because then, as Victoria said already, it's like you're looking at the words and then seeing how aspects of their research can pertain to your area of study. So that's also very useful as well. But really, I have nothing more to add. They did a good job covering it.
Yeah, thank you all for answering. So I think to draw the conclusion, so when overwhelmed by a large amount of information, I think it's safe to say that Control F, the abstract, and I guess the discussion will be your greatest friends. Having said that, let's pass back to Ronald.
Yeah, and those sound really amazing. One of the biggest things that I'm looking in our generation is a change of how we're looking into more video type of knowledge and how we like a lot more visuals. So as we know, YouTube is very popular amongst the younger generations. So one of my biggest questions are there any good YouTube channels that you guys recommend for research? I'll start off with Sarah.
I wish I could be more helpful for this question, but honestly, I'm pretty bad with YouTube. I don't use it very often. I really just go to it if I'm ever, trying to study for a test and then I'll be looking for that topic or something. But in terms of using it, just generally like browsing through it for stuff like research, I'm kind of out of touch with YouTube. So maybe I'll give it to Victoria because I genuinely have never tried it for help with research or papers, anything like that. So she might know something on that.
Yeah. No problem at all. Victoria, do you have any?
Yeah, so I have a few. It would depend a lot on the field that you're interested in, but there's a science channel called Kurzgesagt. I'm not sure how to pronounce it correctly, but it's with really cute animations, and it covers a lot of scientific topics in physics, immunology, like biology, evolution. Like it covers so many things. I think the channel is it makes science really easy to understand and entertaining. Usually the 10-minute long videos, really cool. Actually, that channel was the reason why I became interested in immunology in the first place. So I guess it really helped me at the beginning of my research. And I would also say that there are more specialized YouTube videos for entertainment depending on your specific field. So definitely I think YouTube is one of my favorite places to go to become more interested in the field.
Yeah, that really does sound amazing. And so for any of you viewers, if you guys are interested, please go check out that channel. And YouTube, as we know, is a great source. So you can always refer back there for a lot of this key introductory information if you ever need it. Victoria, I'll pass it back to you.
All right. So the vast amount of information readily presentable by the internet is both a blessing and a curse. We are sometimes bombarded with too much information that we do not even know what websites or topics we should begin by reading into. So, how do you strategically select the specific research papers to be read and analyzed at different times during the research project? So, for this, let's start off with Vitoria.
I would say, let me think about it for a second. I feel like having like one of the ways that I navigate and like organize myself and my websites is I keep everything really tracked. So I think I forget the name of the app, but it's like indexed or something like that, where you can keep track of all the websites that you're accessing and kind of write a little summary for each website. And so that way I can keep track of what information that I acquire each website and then kind of cross-check between different platforms so that I can make sure that the information is like adequate or if it's like accurate. And that way, like I get friends to share with me websites that they find useful. And we're able to kind of create this kind of database of sites and sources that are useful to us. But I definitely would say that you should be really careful of where you acquire your sources, especially if you're in the internet. I would say there are way better ways to acquiring sources that are more valid. So looking into, like as we mentioned before, like PubMed or other databases that are more reliable. So I would definitely say that when I'm selecting my papers or selecting my websites, I'm looking into the credibility, the authors, how reliable these sources are, just so that I can make sure or be more certain that these like sources are accurate.
Yeah, thank you. So this app sounds like a great way to organize your research websites and also to help out fellow other like researchers out. And so finally, Sarah, what are some, I guess, so what are some ways that you can help yourself organize the dozens and tens of and 20s of, I guess, research websites that you may use during your research project?
Yeah, I think the app that Victoria was talking about is really cool. I had no idea something like that exists. When I first started my research, I never, I think, realized how many papers I'd be reading or how much content that there would be over the summer. So I just started off by just bookmarking the tabs. And then now it's a giant thing called research on my laptop that's what's hundreds of tabs. It's really hard to look through. I probably don't recommend that method because it just gets really hard to look for things after a while. I mean, like I knew what the papers were about. So like when I look at the title, it clicked for me what that one was about. And I found stuff pretty easily just because I could recall it that way. But when it gets to like a lot of papers, it can sometimes be really tedious to look through everything and try to find the one that you were, saving from the beginning of summer that you thought you'd need later on. Something I did do that worked though was I'm really big on handwriting stuff, so I had a little notebook of mine where I sort of started off my research, writing down key facts from each paper, then wrote down the title of the paper, and just kept writing in that book throughout the summer. And then I had little tabs, like the yellow tab meant it was glioblastoma research, the blue tab meant it was therapeutic research, stuff like that. So I kind of knew like what each section of the book was about, and I kept putting the tabs in. So now when I go back to the book, I can find those pieces of information really easily. And so I think if that works for you, doing that either on like a laptop, iPad, or in a physical book would be really helpful because then it also helps you remember the research better because it's kind of like studying because you've got like that recall kind of thing and you've got the muscle memory of writing it down so you actually remember the stuff rather than just, I guess having the paper there in front of you when you need it. And so that's, I guess, really good for your long-term learning during the research project. But Victoria's app sounds like a really good way to keep track of what you're looking at, rather than just having a giant bookmark folder of everything that you've seen over the summer. So I think I might look into that.
Yeah, definitely. So taking personal notes, whether that be digital or physical, is a great way at giving yourself cues as to which website refers to which. And that concludes this week's OMS podcast episode. We hope you enjoyed tuning in and learned something new. We would like to say a huge thank you to Victoria, Sarah, and Megan for being here with us.
To learn more information about Operation Med School, go check out our website at operationmedschool.com and our Instagram at Operation Med School. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time.